All right, so you should see our big screen now, and the first thing I would like to do before we start is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and for me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm coming to you from central Sydney, but our teachers who are going to be presenting to you today are coming from their own countries where their houses are today. So I'm going to pass over to Nicole, one of our teachers, who's going to be doing the first part of our presentation for you. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks so much, Glenn, and great to see you all again today. Nice to have you here with us. We're going to be talking about plants and pollinators today, and not many people realize what an incredible relationship that is. But before we start to learn some new things, I wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of some terms or words we used last time. So biodiversity, which is our webinar topic, is really important for all of our healthy ecosystems. Biodiversity, we said, you can split the word into two, and it means the variety of all living things. So variety is like difference, having many, many different types of plants to encourage many different types of animals. So that's what we're really aiming for. It's so, so important for all of our well-being. We also learned a word habitat. So habitats are homes for animals. That's where they find their food, water, and shelter. On the screen, we can see some examples of habitats around Australia. I'm sure you can think of some others. But these are just really interesting to think about when we consider that they are homes for animals, and also the variety that we would find in each of these different places, including the desert, which most people wouldn't imagine would be very diverse in species or animals and plants. So it's interesting to think now, wherever you go outside, you are going into places that are animals' homes. And we need to be mindful of that, particularly because many of the animals we're learning about in this webinar can be really very small or hard to see. So we need to be extra careful going outside doing our investigations. We're looking to, as we said, at pollinators. So pollinators are animals that are moving pollen from flower to flower, and we'll go into some more detail about that. Some of you may know lots about pollinators, but there are many people I come across, even adults, who don't know who all our pollinators are. And amazingly, in Australia, we have an incredible variety of pollinators. I want you to spend a bit of time looking at the images on this picture here. And teachers, it's a good opportunity to take a little bit of time to look at the screen, look at those pictures, talk about those animals. And I want to hear what you think from when your teachers are asking you to find out which of these are pollinators. So which of them you think are pollinators, which ones you think are not pollinators. So have a think. Some might be easier than others to guess as a pollinator. Lots of different animals there and ways we may not think of as pollination. So hopefully you're having a lot of discussion about that. And I know lots of different children have different ideas about the answer as to which one of these are pollinators. Well, if any of you said that all of them are pollinators, you are correct. Every single animal here or method, so looking at wind or you, are ways that plants have developed to spread their seed and their pollen, which is very important for their reproduction and ongoing health and success and survival. So here we've got bees. I'm sure many people guessed that bees, Glenn, if you don't mind going back, I'm sure many people guessed that bees are pollinators. Lots of people know that butterflies are. Not so many people that wasps are pollinators, but also here we have two nocturnal pollinators, moths and bats. So that's pretty amazing. And we'll learn a bit more about how certain flowers and plants attract those pollinators at nighttime. Beetles, flies, lots of people don't consider flies to be pollinators, but they absolutely are. Some birds. With the wind, we can see this is a great example of a flower that needs the wind to spread its seed and its pollen so it can grow more of itself. And also you. So you might wonder about that one, but there are many plants that have been clever enough to be able to attach themselves to animals and people, their seed. And so when that animal or person moves along and then removes those seeds or they fall off them, then that plant has spread its seed and can make more of itself. Really very, very clever. So plants and pollinators have evolved or grown together and changed together over many, many millions of years. And that's how we now have all the different shapes and colors and sizes. And that is also critically important to attracting pollinators. When we look at this picture here of all these beautiful colors and different shapes of flowers, their whole purpose is to call out to pollinators to say, come and visit me. I have a lovely sweet nectar drink. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. We'll find out about that. And while that pollinator is there, they're rubbing up against the pollen and then moving on. So therefore spreading the pollen. That is pollination. Animal pollinated flowers are usually very brightly colored because it's like a big signal to those animals. Whereas when there's wind pollinated flowers, they don't have to be attracting the pollinators. So they're more dull in color. So that means a bit paler and not as exciting to look at maybe. But 80% of the world's flowering plants, which is the same as a third of our food crops, depend on pollinators to reproduce, and most of those are insects. So that's a pretty cool fact that it would be great to share with everybody you know. 1 in every 3 bites of our food comes from pollinators doing their hard work, and most of those are insects. When we look a little closer at what do all plants have in common and understanding how it is that we go from pollination to making the fruits that we know and we enjoy, there's all sorts of things going on in the structure of a plant to make that happen. They are very, very complex and really, really fascinating and all so different to each other in many ways. But what they do all have is the chloroplasts in their leaves, which is the engine, the energy creating part of their plant. And also that helps them to photosynthesize, again, making that energy for them to continue to grow and to grow fruits and other things. So the parts of the plants we can see here are the roots. They all have the roots, of course, the stem to support them, the flower, and then once fertilized, the fruit again with seeds inside. So it keeps going, just a lovely cycle we can see there. So pollination, just revisiting that, is the movement of pollen from flower to flower, but it needs to be moving from one particular part of a flower to another particular part of the flower. We can see all the labeled parts of the flower here. Some of them are quite tricky names. And we can also see here a pretty typical pollinator that we're all familiar with, and that would be the European honeybee, the yellow and black, and we all worry about the stinger, but it's good to know they're not the only bees we have here in Australia, and we're going to be learning more about our native bees in another webinar. But this bee here has special sacs on their legs where they collect the pollen, and they're purposefully moving from flower to flower, collecting that pollen on their legs. And we can see here that they're moving from the anther of one to the stigma of the other, but they're not moving directly to the stigma. As they're flying around and they're moving the pollen, and a bit of pollen's falling off, and they're going deeper into the flower to have a lovely sweet nectar drink, all of that pollen is mixing together. And it's through that the switch is flicked so that the flower can now begin its process of reproduction, making more of itself through its seed and then its fruit. So that's a good example of how pollinators are moving pollen from flower to flower as they go around visiting the different plants. So we talked about how they've evolved. Plants and pollinators have evolved or grown up and changed over many, many millions of years. And they actually work together. They need each other to survive. So from a pollinator's perspective, a flower is there providing them with some food, a nice sweet drink of nectar, and that's often in the center of the flower, sometimes trickier to access for some pollinators than others. Many times there are particular plants and particular pollinators that have a really close relationship and they need only each other, whereas there are some other pollinators and other plants that are happy for a variety of food sources, a variety of flowers to go to. From the plant's perspective, they can't make more of themselves without those pollinators. So they do all sorts of things to make it easy for the pollinators they need to come to them and to be touching and moving around their pollen and then spreading that on to the next plant to start for that plant's life cycle of reproduction and making more of itself. So each of them are benefiting from each other. When you go outside after this webinar or any time, it'd be great to start looking at all these flowers and the incredible variety, but through the eyes of a pollinator, and then also understanding that, wow, all of these incredible shapes and colors and sizes are there for a reason. They have come to that point because of the types of pollinators that they're trying to attract. So again, the diversity, that word again, which is the variety of different flower designs that have evolved over this time to attract those pollinators. So we can look at things like shape. So the flower shape can give us a clue about the type of pollinator that flower or plant is trying to attract. So tubular flowers there we can see attract moths and butterflies that have long tongues that can get right down into the nectar in the center of those flowers. Flowers can also be arranged in groups or clusters, like we can see there on the top right, and therefore can be attracting many pollinators at the same time. And then there's also shallower flowers, which offer a nice landing pad for flies and bees, so they can stand on something while they're having their lovely sweet drink. Color too is very important. So now when you go outside, you can know that the type of color a flower is for a particular reason. And then if you're patient enough, maybe you'll see that pollinator come to visit that particular colored flower. Here are some great examples of the colors that butterflies, bees, flies, and even the nocturnal pollinators are attracted to. So butterflies are looking for red and yellow, orange, pink, and purple, so a good variety. Bees like white, yellow, blue, and purple. Flies prefer reds and purples, and the nocturnal pollinators are looking out for the pale colored or white flowers that are reflecting the light of the moon. So that's pretty amazing too. So flower diversity, again, here's a great example of some Australian plants where that variety has come about because of this ongoing relationship trying to attract pollinators to themselves in many ways. And it can also be through smell as well, to get the pollinators to come, visit them, have a bit of a drink, pick up some pollen and move on to another plant. So diversity, again, is so important for our environment. So the greater the diversity of plants and flowers planted, the greater the diversity of pollinators they will attract. So that's something we also talk about, again, like last time, looking around you, looking in your street, how diverse is your area? And you know what? If it's not, it's a really simple thing to fix by going to the nursery with mum and dad with all this amazing knowledge and picking the right kinds of plants for the pollinators we're trying to support. And importantly there, one little point about some pollinators being generalists, like the European honeybee, who like to visit many, many different types of flowers, or the specialists, that's a type of a pollinator looking for a particular type of plant. So if there is a pollinator that you know might be a specialist feeder that you'd like to attract to your area, do some research about the plant they're looking for and plant lots of it. They'll be so happy to come and visit your place. And then another interesting thing to think about, which I thought I'd put in here, is actually there's also some trickery that goes on in nature sometimes. And when I said before that there is a give and the take, so there is food for being able to pass on the pollen, there are some plants and some animals that actually don't give anything back. So orchids, actually, which many of you may have in your home or in your garden, are very good at what's called deceptive pollination. They're using all of the things we've talked about to attract pollinators to them with their color and their smell and their shape, but they don't offer anything for the pollinator coming. They're not offering any sweet nectar drink. So that's interesting. They're using smells and other ways of bringing the pollinators to them. And then, of course, there are also pollinators that have tricks like the blue-banded bee, who like to pierce through the bottom of a flower to suck out the nectar, so they're not going anywhere near the pollen. Lucky they don't do that too often, but that can happen. So that's something really interesting I thought I'd teach you today as well. When we think about having 1 in every 3 bites of our food coming from pollinators, I thought this image would really help for us to understand what it would look like when we go to the supermarket if we didn't have these pollinators. It says they're bees. Bees are the main pollinators, but there are a huge variety of others, as we've learned. And without these pollinators, we can see it affects the variety of foods that we have. So I certainly know which supermarket I'd be preferring to go to see the variety of foods there. And we can see not only is it the fruits and other things on the top section of that slide and what would be missing, but underneath that also is our dairy cabinets. So many people say, well, what's dairy got to do with pollination? Well, our cows are eating flowers, a particular type of flower. So if that flower wasn't there, the cows wouldn't have anything to eat. That's their favorite food mostly, and wouldn't be able to make the incredible milk they do, which leads to all sorts of products, from milk products to yogurts to cheeses. And we can see what a huge impact that would be if there weren't those right food sources for the cows, and of course for all of our pollinators. So that's something that you can talk to your families about too. I know we definitely wouldn't want to be shopping in anywhere looking like the right-hand side of that picture. But I'm really excited now to cross over to Tristan, because she's got a fantastic activity to do with us today, all about looking at seeds and making our own paper pots. Over to you, Tristan.
Hi, Nicole. Hey, that was great. It really made me start to think about maybe planting some more variety in my veggie garden. So I actually went into my fridge and into the kitchen and had a look at some of the different plants that I have. And I thought maybe I could grow my own. So I was looking at things like these little tomatoes. Can you see how I can see the seeds in there? Also, when we cut up the cucumber, I've noticed that there's seeds there too. My favorite fruit at the moment is the golden kiwi fruit. Look at all the seeds in that one. And then, of course, favorite all year round is the strawberry. But the strawberry is interesting because the seeds are actually on the outside, which is so different. Now, remembering that the fruit obviously occurs after the plant has had a flower and pollination has occurred. So I thought maybe we should work out a way that we could plant some more seeds. So today what I'm going to do is we're going to make a paper pot. So this is a paper pot I made earlier, and you can see that I've put a little tomato plant in there, and it's actually growing really well. I think it's about time for me to transplant that one into the garden. The great thing about the paper pots is I can plant the whole pot into the garden and it will just break down and become part of the soil. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make a paper pot that will allow you to take one of the seeds that you might find out of your fridge or your fruit bowl at home. Maybe you'll even buy some seeds, and then you could plant them straight into the garden once they've become big enough. Now, there's explanation on how to do this and a video how to do this on our website. But if you're following along today, you'll need 2 sheets of newspaper. You'll need a can with an open edge. You'll need a piece of string. I like to use a piece of plain paper so I can write down what the seeds are that I'm creating. And soil, obviously, and some water. So I've got a spray can there. So we're starting off with the 2 pieces of newspaper. And I'm actually going to take that newspaper and I'm going to fold it down about 1/3 of the way. So I'm folding down about 1/3. So if you imagine the newspaper in thirds along the long way and folding it down 1/3. I'm then going to take the can and I'm going to put the closed side next to the fold. And I'm actually going to roll it around. Sometimes when I'm doing this, it's good to have a friend, but I've been doing it so often now that I can do it by myself. But if you need a friend to help you, that's okay too, because the next part is a little bit tricky. I'm actually going to take my piece of paper and I'm going to write, I think I'll do some cucumber seeds this time. So I'm going to write cucumber. I always like to do some pictures on mine too. So I've written cucumber and I'm going to draw a picture of a cucumber, just so I remember what's in there. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to roll it around the outside as well. And I'm going to tie some string. Now the string will help me keep it all together. So I'm putting a knot there. You can do a bow. So a knot there. And now I'm going to take the newspaper and I'm going to push it all in. And this will form the bottom of my pot. Now I'm going to wiggle and my can comes out. And you can see it's a little bit chunky in there. So I push that down to make the flat part of my pot. So now I've got a great flat base. You can see my cucumber. I'm going to put some soil into my pot. Oh, I'm going to make a bit of a mess, but that's okay because I'm outside today. So putting lots of soil in there. You can get soil from, you can buy it from supermarkets in bags, but sometimes you can even collect your own from little bits out of gardens. So sometimes I collect, but sometimes I've got a bag of soil that I like to use. I actually make compost too by putting all my leftover bits and pieces from my vegetables into a big compost bin. So that makes really great soil too. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. So now I've got my soil and I'm going to take my piece of cucumber and around the edges there's all those little seeds. Normally I would dry them out, but that's all right today. I'm going to break it up a little bit and I'm going to place them just in the top of my pot and I'm going to cover it over. Now what I know will happen, that bit of fruit, which is actually the cucumber, when that rots away, that will actually feed the seeds. And of course, most important, bit of water. And I'll have to remember to water that every day to make sure that there's plenty of water in there so my seeds can grow. So remember, if you guys are making your own paper pots, there are instructions on our website how to do that. There's actually a video and we'd love to see what you create. So maybe you could send us some photos and show us what you're doing at home. I'm going to go back over to you now, Glenn and Nicole. See you guys.
Thanks, Tristan. So hopefully you can follow along either with Tristan, which she just did then, or like she said, there's a recording on our website if you forget what she said of how you can do that. And of course, you can make as many pots as you like. You only need one tin and you could make hundreds of pots and fill them up with seeds and plant them in your garden. Okay, and that way you don't have to buy plastic pots from a nursery or somewhere like that. So like Tristan said, we would love to see your examples of your work that you've been doing. So on our website, if you go to the Biodiversity and Pollinators page on our website, which is called the Observatory Hill Environmental Education Centre. Okay, so I'll just say it one more time, the Observatory Hill Environmental Education Centre. And on our online learning page, there's a tab there for Biodiversity and Pollinators, and you can click in, and on that page, there will be a gallery to show where we can showcase your fantastic work. So you can upload your work through the button that says Share My Work. You can see that button down the bottom, the big blue button. Just click that button. When you click that, you'll get to a form that looks like this one. And all you need is a photograph of your work that you've done, whether it's the pot that you've made or maybe a couple of pots, and you can show those to us on our website and upload them. If you go to a non-Department of Education school, so that's a private school, there's a different way and it tells you on the website. You can just email those to us and we'll upload those on the website for you. All right, so that's how you can participate after this webinar. And don't forget, there's lots more information on that website about other things that you can do to participate, as well as the other 5 webinars that make up this series of 6 different webinars talking about different aspects of biodiversity and pollination. But for everybody here, that's it for today. We hope that you had fun. We hope that you learnt a lot about how plants require pollinators and how they help to pollinate. And we will see you next time, hopefully on session number 3.